Hello, and welcome to my postseason team analysis for the NBBL Season 3. We just had our championship game earlier today, and if you haven't seen the result, please go and watch it. It was a great game, in my opinion, and it's about to be spoilers. 3, 2, 1. We managed to win. So, last league where we did one of these analyses, we lost in finals. It was brutal, it was well played, it was a very fun season. This time we managed to come out with the win. And so for the first time, I feel like in years, I am like champion of a league. I've definitely been in a lot of different like skill level leagues that have ended early, leagues that I was clearly outmatched or didn't draft a good team or made some transactions that just did not work for me. So I've definitely had my share of bad luck or bad gameplay. Honestly, sometimes I was just the worst player and that happens. So it feels good to make it all the way to the end and win. And something that I didn't note in the actual video for the battle was something cool is we went 5-3 in the regular season, and we ended up playing all three of our opponents that beat us in the regular season in playoffs, and ended up beating all three of them on the second battle. So really happy about that. GG's to all of my opponents this whole season. It's been amazing. But now we have 14 Pokemon to review that I used this season, and I have their stats up. The stats may not be absolutely perfect, I will say. Something messed up in the playoffs numbers, so all the regular season numbers are fine, but the playoffs numbers are a little weird. So just give me a little bit of grace if I do manage to mess up some numbers, which I'm sure it's totally fine. I'm gonna have one MVP, maybe two, but I think really I'm just gonna have one MVP for the season. And then the way I'm listing these is a Pokemon that's absolutely amazing that I think should be like the centerpiece of any of my drafts moving forward. And I would highly recommend anybody use at least once, especially while Scarlet and Violet is still the meta, because there are a lot of times that people go back and play older metas, but I think it's definitely worth using them while this meta is still fresh, right? While we're still in the current meta. Better Than Expected is usually reserved for like mid to low tier Pokemon that I draft, not really expecting them to do anything, and they do more than I expect. Saying something did its job and that's it. That's exactly what it sounds like. And I made this tier specifically because I had a couple of Pokemon in mind that just kind of fit right in this tier. Slightly disappointing tier. This is kind of the bottom, I guess you could say, because the next tier down I wouldn't call the bottom, just because it's in an odd place. But anyway, the slightly disappointing tier is Pokemon just didn't work as well as I wanted them to, and there's actually quite a few that I think will fit in this tier. But yeah, we'll see. And then not this league, but I usually love. Special case, I'll get over it as it comes up. But we're going to go over our drop Pokemon first. We made 4 transactions on week 3 of the league. Or I suppose after week 3 of the league. And one of the Pokemon we dropped that really hurt me was a Grumpig. I love Grumpig. I think in this generation, it is such a good low tier Pokemon, especially with low tier Tera rules. I think giving this thing the ability to Tera, whether you have to pick certain types for it or whether it can be Omni-Tera, I think it goes crazy. Thick Fat is such a good general ability to just slap on this Pokemon. It makes it super defensive against 2 super common offensive typings in the meta. And it's a pure Psychic type, so it only has a handful of weaknesses that it can easily deal with, or it can move them around using its Teras, right? I think if you're going to draft this, if it's Tera available, Tera Fairy is probably the best type on it, just flat, because it has so many good resistances with that Tera, plus a resistance to fire and ice, the ability to Calm Mind like crazy. I think a Keyberry could go really well on this. I think there's a lot of things Grumpig could have. Obviously, Calm Mind Leftovers is the standard set, but there's Nasty Plot, there's some other things it can run. I think it's a great Pokemon. It ended up going 2-0 for us. We brought it to 1 battle against Nova. I would have definitely used it more had I not dropped it, but unfortunately we did have to drop it to make room for our other Pokemon. Specifically, I don't like stacking Psychics when I can help it, unless one of the Psychics has like no actual Psychic weaknesses, something like a Hatterene. So I just didn't want to stack Psychics, and I had other intentions. I needed rolls from the Pokemon I dropped, specifically when I dropped Ogerpon, I needed Ogerpon's grass type roll somewhere else, right? And so we ended up throwing that in the low tier, and so that's kind of why we had to lose Grumpig. But it was good. It was better than I expected. I never really thought it was that good of a Pokemon. It didn't get buffed all that much through the generations, but honestly, it getting Earth Power is enough to make it usable on its own, and better than a ton of other low tier psychics. So yeah, I liked it. Next up's Ribombee. Ribombee, I'm gonna put in the not this league, but I usually love. And I think that might be a case of Generation 9 more so than just this league. I think I adored Ribombee in Gen 7 and Gen 8 even. I really like Sticky Web in Draft. I know that people tend to say it's kind of a noob trap. People tend to hyper focus on it, and Sticky Web Pokemon usually only do that. They don't do a whole lot more. There's a few others. Araquanid can be offensive. Ribombee's like the fastest one, so it can also be slightly offensive. But Ribombee is always completely walled by like fire types and steel types. So it struggles a lot into pretty much every matchup, honestly. There's one Pokemon that at least hard walls it. So the Quiver Dance sets are never really viable. Sticky Web's nice, but with heavy duty boots in the meta now, your sweeper can just run boots, and they were going to run boots anyway because Stealth Rock or whatever. And yeah, it just wasn't great. It's not working in Gen 9. I loved Ribombee prior to this generation, but I think this generation is the one that really made it bad. I'm not going to say bad. Made it worse than it usually is. Also, Ribombee on a team with Cinderace, it was kind of awkward because I don't want to court change my webs back onto myself. This isn't that kind of team. So just did not fit this league that well. And it was expensive too. I think Ribombee was very expensive in this league. So ended up dropping it, needed the points, and used them elsewhere. So we had Ogerpon-Teal. I wanted to try this since it came out. I think the other three, obviously they're all really good, better than this Ogerpon. But I love item freedom in Draft League. I think it's one of the most important things. I gotta tell you, man, I think Ogerpon-Teal Mask was disappointing. And that's just me. I've seen other people use it crazy well. When it can Tera, it is an absolute menace because +1 speed and Defiant is scary. And that double stab Ivy Cudgel. Obviously, Grass has a lot of resistances, but Ogerpon gets decent coverage. Not perfect coverage. It has trouble hitting certain types still. But I think it's a very good Pokemon overall. It just, without Tera, I think it suffers a lot. And even when it has an item, you want to run offensive, but you also want to run defensive. You want to run support. You want to run pivoting. You want to run Swords Dance. You want to run like all of its grass coverage because Horn Leech is a great move. Ivy Cudgel is obviously a fantastic move. Power Whip you need for the power sometimes. So I don't know. Ogerpon-Teal's in a weird place. I feel like it's better when Cudgel can be its own type, and then you can throw on that secondary stab, the Horn Leech, the Power Whip, whatever you need. And then the Leech Seed Spiky Shield sets are usually kind of my bread and butter. They're some of my favorite. I don't know. I couldn't make it work with Ogerpon. I'm not sure why. It's some kind of disconnect with me. But I found that in Gen 9, I love a grass type, but that grass type needs to be low tier. I can't be spending a lot on my grass type, or I can't get good Pokemon elsewhere. I didn't say it. Ribombee went 0 and 0 and 0. We never brought it before we dropped it. Just didn't make room for it. Ogerpon went 0 and 0 in 1, I believe. It didn't do anything. It came out on the field, I believe, but we never really made forward progress with it. So not great for me. And then last up is Hydreigon. It's somewhere between these two. I'm going to put it here actually because I loved Hydreigon in the past. Being able to roost was really useful for it, having the option to defog and losing some of its tools over time, losing Toxic. It hurts it so bad. I think one of the best parts of Hydreigon for me was the fact that it could become a defensive support Pokemon and do different things than just damage. Obviously, Choice Specs, Choice Scarf are going to be some of the best things you could possibly put on it. And with Tera, once again, it's amazing. Tera Poison, Tera Steel, it can be really annoying defensively. But losing its tools and not being a Tera Pokemon in this league really disappointed me. I've used it in the past and I've adored it, but I also think that Hydreigon's kind of suffering the curse of Generation 9 is too strong for it. And maybe not too strong. Hydreigon's obviously still very strong, but Generation 9 is too fast for it. There are so many fairies or Pokemon that get fairy coverage, or Tera Pokemon that are Tera Fairy, or in the same vein, fighting, that just threaten to one-shot it, and it can't really do much about it. So I just think Hydreigon is in a weird spot in this meta. With Tera, it's fine, but I think Nat decks and previous generations, you're going to find a lot more enjoyment with Hydreigon. So yeah, it just wasn't for me. And I wanted to transition straight into Hydreigon's replacement, Moltres. Moltres G is going in my amazing tier. Moltres G is so fun to use. If you guys haven't used it and you've been playing leagues where you've had to do a lot of thinking, draft Moltres G and you won't have to think very much, because honestly this Pokemon, it has about 3 or 4 viable sets. I think I mentioned it a couple times throughout my battles. It only has a couple sets it really ever runs. It doesn't do much. It has next to no utility. I think its utility is Taunt and Tailwind, right? So it's not doing a whole lot. And Snarl, I suppose, if you want to count that. I guess you could do like Snarl Throw Spray if you really wanted, but I don't really see a point. Moltres G for me went 8-2 in 4 battles. That is crazy. I struggle to get a lot of my sweepers off the ground, but that's in the regular season. That was good. Unfortunately, in playoffs, we brought it 3 games and it went 0-1. It dropped a donut. We did not get a single KO with Galarian Moltres in playoffs. But that's because people were super prepping for this thing, right? Like, I don't know. With a lot of my battles, there were different Pokemon that people brought specifically to deal with Moltres. Like, it was kind of crazy. I think particularly it was people bringing things that dealt specifically with Moltres and Alcremie, because they both boost specially and kind of do the same thing. So it was just easy to put a Spadefmon that resisted some combination of Fairy, Psychic, Dark, and Flying, right? So Moltres was great, though. I will say it did absolutely fantastic. Things like agility into living the Dragapult Thunderbolt. I forget exactly which week that was. Living a Dragapult Thunderbolt, knocking it out, and proceeding to sweep the game was fantastic. That was one of my favorite moments from this season. We had some other moments where, like, we got hit by a Dark Void from Darkrai and ate our Chesto Berry from our rest set. So yeah, it was a good time. And yeah, really this mon runs 3 items: Boots, Chesto Berry, and Weakness Policy. You can run Leftovers, but it's not super good on it. Citrus Berry obviously very good too, to get multiple Berserk boost. If you ever run Moltres G, bring screens. Screens make it so much better. You can run Weakness Policy, you can do Nasty Plot and Agility. My only real problem with it was I always wanted to run 5 moves. I wanted Dark coverage, Flying coverage. I wanted both setup options with Agility and Nasty Plot, and then I wanted to either rest or I wanted some kind of support move, maybe Taunt. So yeah, if you ran Moltres, definitely, you know, it's a great, and it has just a couple sets. Give it a try. Maybe don't use Hurricane. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I hate Hurricane as a move, so I wouldn't run it. Oh yeah, and we ran the Scarfed Dual Wing Beat set because it gets Scarf U-turn. It can be physical, it can be special, and we knocked out a Ribombee turn 1 with it, so that was super exciting. So yeah, loved this Pokemon. Next up for me is Blastoise. I don't know how I feel about Blastoise. That's the one I haven't really thought about yet. For now, we're going to put it in Did Its Job, and that's it. And we may move it in the future. I was thinking, I kind of thought about it earlier, and I was kind of considering putting it in Slightly Disappointing, sadly. It is relatively disappointing this season, but I think when we needed it to do something, it did it, right? So it went 4-5 for us in 5 battles, and then in playoffs we brought it once and it went 0-1. So not really a showing at all in playoffs. I actually brought like almost the same teams every single time in playoffs. I was not very creative during that. But yeah, I think it's not bad. When I saw that Nova had this thing, Tera legal, I built my team around it, truly. Like, I thought, how can you possibly give me a Tera legal Shell Smash Blastoise in this meta? Like, it's gonna go crazy, right? And we didn't bring Shell Smash until week 8 of the regular season, and it proceeded to just get crit 3 screens, right? It completely disappointed me. Like, it got 1 KO on a Tera Water Colossal with Tera Blast Grass, and that was it. Now, the defensive sets, honestly, were kind of great. They cooked a little, because we had Body Press, we had Flip Turn, Aqua Jet, Rapid Spin, of course. You could run Iron Defense, Body Press on Blastoise, but without good healing options, it's really not that good. And I found that with Shell Smash, where it only has base like 80s for its offenses, it really struggles to get KOs at +2. So honestly, I think it was totally fair for it to be legal to be run as a Tera Cap. As far as Tera types go, I think I ran Water, Dragon, Grass, and I don't know that I ever Tera Dragoned. I know that I Tera Grassed once with Shell Smash, and I Tera Grass as a defensive type, and I definitely Tera Watered with the Choice Scarf Water Spout set, because that was really cool. Unfortunately for me, that set, we ended up losing that game, but I thought that set was really neat. So yeah, Blastoise has good options. I think other Teras could be just fine too. Tera Electric, Tera Fairy, of course. Tera Fairy is never a bad option. You know, there's a few different Teras you could run on Blastoise and it can do its job. But honestly, I was not impressed. I thought it was just a little bit too weak. People prepped really hard for it. There's so many bulky waters, bulky grasses running around that it really struggles to KO, that I think just needs more support than I was able to give it, and maybe a smarter person than me could have run Shell Smash and gotten more sweeps with it, but I couldn't. Going back to Grumpig for just a second, I think I ran Tera Fairy and Tera Dark, if I'm not mistaken. So I would not run Tera Dark on it again. I would do like Tera Fire, Tera Water, you know, something more defensive. But moving on to our next Pokemon and our most expensive Pokemon, we made our trades. I wanted something crazy fast. I always like having something that's pretty high up there in the speed range, just to force Scarves. And Deoxys-Speed really did that for me. Would I put it in amazing? Probably not. Because if we looked at stats, it went 0-3. It dropped a donut in the regular season, and this is our most expensive Pokemon in 4 games. And then in playoffs, it went 1-1 in 3 games. So our Deoxys ended up going 1-4. That is pretty pathetic for a really expensive Pokemon. But that's also on me, right? Because I ran Deoxys to be full support most of the time. We won a game through Hazard Stack at one point. We set screens with it at one point. It did a lot of chip damage in a lot of different battles. We had Psychic Noise on it. We've run Psycho Boost several times. There's a lot of pros about using Deoxys-Speed. Not least being that it can actually set up defensively. That's something I never did this season. But if you invest 252 in its health and run Cosmic Power, Stored Power, it's really easy for this thing to get out of hand. Pressure Stall, you got Recover, and then you can run your choice of coverage, honestly. And it's actually really good. Like, I'm not lying. My problem with Deoxys-Speed, I would say in a vacuum, it's kind of weak to Scarfers is the first thing, which is totally understandable and expected, and you should anticipate your opponent to bring Scarfers against it. My other problem is its moveset needs updated. Like, Deoxys-Speed's moveset feels like it's out of an earlier gen, like maybe Gen 6. It doesn't get a single fairy move, right? That I'm aware of. It doesn't get Gleam, it doesn't get Moonblast, doesn't get Play Rough. So it really misses out because fairy psychic coverage is a very bread and butter combo. It doesn't hit steals, but it hits everything else. Its fighting coverage is limited to Focus Blast and Superpower and Low Kick. So it really would love to have Aura Sphere for a lot of sets, and it's just not there. Other than that, I could go on about its different moves. It obviously gets a ton of moves. Deoxys gets a great move set, but it's missing some vital coverage. It's missing special fire coverage. It only gets Fire Punch. It's missing just pieces here and there. If you ever do a league where it can Tera, then honestly, it's probably not good, because if a league lets a Pokemon as high up as Deoxys-Speed Tera, then other Pokemon up there are going to be absolutely busted with it. So I don't know if I'd recommend it. As a support Pokemon, obviously it's amazing. Rocks, Spikes, both screens on a 180 speed Pokemon. The only thing that outspeeds it being Regieleki. That's insane. That's such a good Pokemon, such good utility. There's a lot of ways you can be creative with all 4 Deoxys types. Maybe not Deoxys Attack. I've never really played with Attack or Normal, but Deoxys Defense and Deoxys Speed, one of my favorite things about them is the amount of versatility they have. So would definitely recommend trying one out at some point, whether it be Speed or Defense. I think they're relatively the same. Defense is a lot weaker to Taunt, and Deoxys-Speed enjoys using Taunt more, but obviously Deoxys-Speed can't take as many hits, so use whichever. It did better than, I'm putting it in better than expected, just because I've never really liked the Deoxys-Speed, like the non-Deoxys defense line, and honestly, some of the games, I think it won, at least partially for me, by doing the chip damage it did. So, next up we have Leafeon. And it is the sole reason at first that I made this did its job and that's it tier. Blastoise is definitely somewhere between top of slightly disappointing, bottom of did its job and that's it. Leafeon was here to fill a role that I needed filled, and that was a grass type. It's a Leech Seeder, it has good physical attack, and it has a really awkward moveset that I almost brought to finals with Calm Mind and Stored Power. Because, you know, Eevee gets kind of moves on both sides that then all the evolutions get. And obviously some of those moves are not great, some of those moves are terrible on Pokemon. And yeah, Leafeon is just awkward. It has a really high health, so it can actually perform really well as a defensive Pokemon, I will say. And obviously it's a good sweeper, especially if you have Sun. This team had no Sun. That's one of the weird things about Leafeon is if you don't run Sun, both of its abilities are useless. It doesn't get any kind of utility out of its abilities if there's no Sun. Now, Leafeon for us went 2-1 in 2 games in the regular season, did not make an appearance in playoffs. And one of the 2 games, the one it popped off in, was the Sun team. We took advantage of our opponent's Sun, and we were able to sweep with it. So, well, not sweep, but we were able to break some. So in that specific circumstance, if your team is incredibly, incredibly weak to Sun teams, throwing on something like a Leafeon to have that counter chlorophyll, would I run it again? Probably not. There's a ton of good grass types out there. Leafeon was one of many. I don't remember what my thinking was on why I picked Leafeon over other grasses, but I guess it fit a speed tier better, or it had Swords Dance. You know, it could be a physical offense because we're kind of lacking offense some on this team. As far as Tera types, I picked those Tera types last minute. It was Steel and Fairy. I'll be honest, I don't really think Steel was that good on it. I guess on some Subseed sets, a Steel type would be really obnoxious. We never needed to run it this season, so Steel could have been good. It wasn't good for us at the end of the day. And I think part of that is because it doubles up that Fire weakness, right? And then our other type's Fairy, so Fire cleanly covers at least neutral on Leafeon. So if I would do it again, I would probably switch Leafeon's second type to Water. The other reason to not do that, though, is we did have Blastoise as another Tera cap. So if people prep for a combination of Water and Grass with their coverage, then they covered a lot of our Tera caps, which is not great for me. Otherwise, you know, Leafeon's fairly straightforward. It was cheap. It was like 2 or 3 points, so we slapped it on because it was able to do a couple things in a couple games, and that's it. And sometimes that's all you need from a low tier, right? So it did better than never showing up. It did better than those meme 1-point picks that people make. So I liked it as far as our bottom tier pick went. Next up is Landorus-Therian. And this Pokemon, you know how it is. It's bread and butter. It's one of the all-time classic Pokemon in Draft and in VGC and in singles. It is everywhere. Until Incineroar came around, this was like the #1 talked about Pokemon for just being overused everywhere. So I'm going to put it in the bottom of better than expected because I never really know what to expect out of Landorus T. And if there was one thing that Landorus T really made me happy about in this league, it forced so many Pokemon to run ice coverage. Like that last game, if you watched it, Landorus forces Donphan to run both Ice Shard and Ice Spinner. Our team is not very weak to ice outside of Landorus and Moltres, you know. So just being able to force moves like that is so handy. It forced multiple people to bring Adrenaline Orb or Clear Amulet. I know Frosty went crazy with the Clear Amulets and Adrenaline Orbs trying to counter Landorus, and that was super smart, you know. Nova brought 2 Clear Amulets to deal with a mixture of Landorus's Intimidate and Grafaiai's Parting Shot. So just forcing that prep, forcing those items is really valuable because then your opponent's not running boosting moves, they're not running sashes, they're not running choice items. So it's just a big plus to make your opponent use items they would never use if you didn't have that specific Pokemon. So I do like that a lot. Obviously, Landorus is kind of weird since it was nerfed. So no knockoff and no defog. You may not think those are big hits, but those are huge, huge hits to Landorus. No toxic. All 3 of those moves were so valuable and added to so much to its utility that a lot of times I was kind of at a loss for what to run on it. I would always want a ground move, whether it be physical or special, because there are a lot of times Earth Power can catch things off guard, or, you know, things like grassy terrain would not weaken Earth Power. U-turn and then Taunt Stealth Rock are really good. It's got rock coverage. It's got like a few things it could run otherwise, but it sorely, sorely misses knockoff, defog, and toxic. And so I wouldn't put it higher than this. I don't know if I'd recommend using it, honestly. I don't know if I mentioned with Leafeon, but you can use it if you want. But as far as Landorus, I don't know that I would recommend it in Scarlet and Violet. Like, it's decent. Oh, it lost Rock Polish too. Let's not forget. It can't set up its speed anymore, so I can't just outrun everything with ice coverage and knock it out before it can knock me out. So, yeah, Landorus has been kind of unfairly nerfed. Like, I know it was super strong, but all the moves it's lost has just made it into kind of a one trick. Like, obviously you can run Band, you can run Scarf, you can run Helmet. I ran Yachi Berry at least a couple times, Boots, you know. So it has a variety of items, but its moveset is severely impacted by the nerfs. I don't know if I mentioned it. It went 3 and 4 in 7, so it actually went negative for us and came to 7 out of 8 games, which is kind of wild. But then in playoffs, it made up for all that, and at least as far as this says, it went 2 and 0 in 4 games, so never got KO'd in playoffs, which is pretty cool. I don't know that that's correct. I think oh, never mind. It definitely did get KO'd. Sorry, I just thought about that, and there's definitely a stat that's wrong. It got KO'd at least once, maybe twice. So at least almost went even, so not bad. And we brought it to every game except 2, right? We didn't bring it against Nova once, and we didn't bring it somewhere in the regular season. But it's a glue Pokemon. It's there for a reason. It's high tier. It always has a reason to be brought. Intimidate is a fantastic ability, and it's Rock's utility at the end of the day. So it's not bad, but I don't know. This generation makes me feel a little worse using it. So Alcremie is next. And it is down here with Ogerpon in the slightly disappointing tier. Some of that is that it can't Tera. It wasn't a Tera captain this season, which is weird to say, right? Because it's a fairy type. So fairy types don't always want a Tera because fairy is such a good type naturally. But Alcremie really hurts from not having good coverage. I don't remember that it still gets Mystical Fire. I know it gets grass coverage, it gets psychic coverage. But it really suffers without Tera and without other options. It went 0 and 0 in 1. We never sent this thing out on the field. We had it in the back for 1 game in the regular season, and then it never showed up in playoffs. What I liked about it, though, and what actually makes me put it above Ogerpon, if it lets me, what makes me want to put it above Ogerpon is it forced so much prep. Because it is a scary Pokemon. If you think about it, if you don't prep for... Sorry, I had an itch. If you don't prep for this Pokemon running Acid Armor, Calm Mind, and either 2 coverage moves or Fairy / Stored Power, and then Recover, you could get swept by this thing in an instant. Like, it is scary. Of course, there are a lot of things that outrun it and have super effective coverage for it, but then my opponents are running Poison and Steel coverage, and my team, if you kind of ignore the Pokemon I dropped, are not weak at all to Poison and Steel. So just having a Fairy on the team was forcing... I don't think as much Fairy and Steel coverage, but things like Sleep and other Disruption, Heavy Slam on Heatran. It was forcing physical moves on typically special Pokemon, which is always a win because then they have to play with Natures. They have to put EVs into their physical attack where they never would have done that otherwise. So I think Alcremie, even though it was disappointing because I was never really able to use it, I think just the prep it forced made it good enough, right? But I would not say it did its job because it never did anything, right? So that's kind of hard. I'm gonna skip over Cinderace for a second. Gholdengo is a weird one for this tier list because Gholdengo was amazing this season. It had the most kills in our regular season, so I would want to put it like up here, but everybody knows Gholdengo is amazing. So does that, I expected it to do well. So does that mean I put it down here? I would put it up here. I would put it in amazing. And I know it's Gholdengo. It's like the great of Gen 9 or one of the greats of Gen 9 because there are several really good Pokemon. But Gholdengo is just, it's Gholdengo. It's a Steel Ghost, which is one of the absolute best types in the game. Its ability is the most broken, overtuned ability you've ever seen besides Shedinja, because it just, statuses don't work on it. My opponent can't paralyze me. My opponent can't put me to sleep. I got burned at least once on it from a secondary effect, which is kind of funny. But normal status moves just don't work on Gholdengo. If I had been more crazy with my hazard setting with Deoxys, I could have used Gholdengo to block Defogs. I don't think I ever needed to in this season. But the option was there, and the synergy's great. I have one complaint about Gholdengo. I will always have this complaint about Gholdengo when it's on my team, and I will never complain when it's on the enemy team. Gholdengo has no way to boost its speed. So if you need your Gholdengo to be faster than base like 84, you have to run Scarf. And Scarf suddenly, if you get stuck in a Mega Rain, you can let your opponent sweep you because you're a -1 Gholdengo using a Steel type move that's resisted by so many Pokemon. So that's kind of my issue with it. And then its secondary stab, Shadow Ball's relatively weak. And then it has to run coverage like Dazzling Gleam, Thunderbolt, Focus Blast, which I would never condone, but I did run it at least once. Never clicked it, but I did have to run it. So Gholdengo's amazing. And then you have Trick for the Scarf, of course. You can run Nasty Plot sets. You can run bulky sets with Air Balloon, Colbur Berry, Shuka Berry. You know, it's a great Pokemon. It's still slow for this meta, I've got to say. 84 speed is not getting it anywhere. It is being undersped, or it is being outsped by like over half of most teams. Thunder Wave does help a little bit. The fact that it does have Thunder Wave does help it quite a bit, I would say, and gives it more of that kind of supportive utility. But man, this thing really wants to boost its speed so bad. I still remember in a VGC league I played in, I had to deal with an Adrenaline Orb Gholdengo, and it was bad. It was so good into me. So yeah, if you ever want to boost speed and your opponent has like 2 to 3 Intimidators, would highly recommend Gholdengo. Oh, and then for our regular season, it went 9-5 in 7. So we left it off once, and then it went 9-5. And then in playoffs, it went 4-1 in 4. So once again, we left it off once. But Gholdengo ended up with 13 KOs and 6 deaths. So it ended up over 2.0 KD and in 11 games. So I'm super stoked about that. That's the main reason I'm cool with putting it in Amazing. It probably is better than Moltres because it does have more reason to be brought than Moltres, I would say, because sometimes Moltres is hard-walled, things like Pheasantipity, bulky dark types, a lot of bulky Pokemon that resist one of Dark or Flying and then don't care about the other one. It's still an amazing Pokemon, but it has more weaknesses than Gholdengo, I would say. So we'll switch those. Next up, we've got my Tera Cap that took Blastoise's spotlight for itself. This is personal bias. If we're being honest with ourselves, it's probably worse than Landorus this season. It did better than expected, but it wasn't anything amazing. I don't care. This is personal bias. I'm putting him all the way up in Amazing. I just said Gholdengo at least a couple times. This is Grafaiai. I'm sorry. It's pretty late at night, and I just wanted to record this while the team is still kind of fresh in my head because we're done with this league after this. So moving on from it. But I did draft Grafaiai in another league, albeit not Tera, but I think as a Tera Cap, Grafaiai was so fun to use. This Pokemon has so many interesting tools because it has the parting shot, the Prankster parting shot of something like Grimmsnarl. It has the Prankster Encore of like Whimsicott. It has a super unique typing with normal poison that's really annoying for certain Pokemon to deal with. Pokemon like Gengar, Haunter that we had to deal with, absolutely struggle to touch this thing. They have to run Psychic coverage, and Psychic coverage is so bad into this team overall. And then so we ran Tera Dark, which I think Tera Dark is kind of like an amazing Tera for Grafaiai because suddenly it's not weak to Psychic, it's not weak to Ground anymore, and then it's weak to still resist Ghost, so you don't lose that resistance. And then one of the most clickable moves on Grafaiai is that knockoff. So being able to boost your damage of knockoff is really nice. I will say the 110 speed tier is so crowded these days with all the Ogerpons and a lot of other Pokemon running around. It's really hard. I hate speed ties. I try to avoid them when I can. Prankster helps you get around that a little bit because if you're Prankster, you don't care if your opponent's the same speed or faster than you. You just outrun them anyway. So that was cool. One of my favorite parts about Grafaiai is it literally has 3 usable abilities, and I used all 3 of them at some point in this, and they all came in clutch at some point. So Prankster, obviously the most basic ability you can use, Encore, Parting Shot, but you also have setup moves, you have Taunt, you have some options. It's not amazing. The Grafaiai has that new generation moveset, so definitely leaves some things to be desired. I hope it gets buffed in the next gen, get some more kind of tutor moves. But that's probably wishful thinking. It may not even show up in Gen 10. But I do like it quite a bit as a kind of Prankster supportive Pokemon, because one of the things in Generation 9 is you really have to be aware of Pokemon setting up on you. A lot of teams just run setup and will continue. The one Pokemon will set up, attack till it dies. Next Pokemon comes out, sets up, attack till it dies. It's a very common strategy in Scarlet and Violet. and having a Pokemon that can Encore lock any non-dark type in, you know, that's fantastic. That forces them out. You can then get a parting shot, you can knock them off, you can U-turn for damage, and that's just so valuable on a team. Just sweep prevention is so important, right? I love having a Focus Sash somewhere when I can guarantee keep hazards away. When I can't keep hazards away, I like Boots and Sturdy. And when I can't do that, I like a Prankster Pokemon, because Prankster is one of the best ways to stop your opponent from sweeping. The other option is really strong priority, but that can be kind of hard to come by, and that's really type dependent. So I feel like Prankster is kind of my third in the tier of preventing sweeps. You got Unburden, which, you know, why would you run Unburden if a Pokemon's 110 base speed? But if you want to outspeed a Scarfer that's creeping your Deoxys-Speed, which I've done, you run Unburden, and you run something like a Citrus Berry. Grafaiai doesn't get amazing options for things to proc. I don't have a terrain setter on this team. I think 1 week I did run Psychic, Terrain, Deoxys with Teleport with Grafaiai to set up and sweep, but then my opponent's team wasn't what I thought it was, so we had to deal with an unaware Dondozo. So that wasn't fantastic. But yeah, Unburden has the ability to be good. This week we didn't get to use it, but for finals I brought a Nasty Plot set, even though Grafaiai's special coverage is absolutely horrible. Just letting it be a Tera Pokemon more than made up for that fact. And then Poison Touch. Poison Touch is great, I think, specifically on Choice Band and Choice Scarf sets. When you're not really running any utility moves, you run Trick, but if you're Scarf, you don't really need the Prankster Trick. And then you just run U-turn, Knock Off, Poison Move, and probably Low Kick. Low Kick was absolutely fantastic on this Pokemon this season. Having the fighting coverage was so useful. Which brings me to Tera's. I think if I ran this again, I wouldn't do Tera Poison. I think I would do Tera Normal. There were a couple matchups where Tera Normal Double Edge would have like cleanly swept teams. So I really think I would have went that had I had another chance to use Grafaiai as a Tera captain. I think Fighting and Dark are fantastic off-stab typings. Obviously, they just give you stronger coverage into things that resist Normal and Poison, your Steel types, and a lot of Ghosts, right? So those two types are great. If I could run a fourth type on Grafaiai, or if I could run Free Terra in the future, I think Flying is super underrated. Not only does it completely nullify that ground weakness that Grafaiai has, you have Acrobatics. And if you can get rid of your item, Acrobatics on Burden, so you get a +2 with a Sword Stance, and suddenly that Acrobatics is Stab, this thing could sweep through teams. There are so many teams that are so weak to flying. So many people don't draft good flying resistances. And then if people have them and Low Kick takes them out at +2, then this Grafaiai could sweep games and not even run a standard stab move. Acrobatics, Low Kick, Sword Stance, and then whatever you want on your last move. I think Grafaiai is fantastic. It even gets Trailblaze if you don't want to run Unburden and you want to boost your speed. So if you haven't used this Pokemon, please do. I didn't know what to expect going in. I had never used it before. Absolutely adored it. I think everybody should use it. And it went 5-3 for me in 6 games. And then in playoffs, I brought it all 5 weeks. I brought Blastoise 1 week, but I brought Grafaiai all 5 weeks. So that maybe I was trying to force it. It went 4-2 and then 5-3. So it ended 9-5 in 11 games. So not amazing. You know, that's not the best score in the world, but it was consistently picking up a KO pretty much every time it came, or a couple times it like kind of swept almost. And then when it wasn't KOing things, it was weakening them so that our Pokemon could set up, or so that we could get our defensive Pokemon in safely and not take as much chip damage. So I think, you know, just did absolutely amazing things for us. And as you can see, these last two, one of them has to be the MVP. Both of these Pokemon I think did really well for me this season. I used Cinderace before. I've talked about it before in the last one of these. It was our MVP this time. Last time it was not our MVP because Sinistcha was so good. This time, Cinderace did absolute wonders for us. And probably the best part of that, I didn't realize this. We only brought Cinderace to 3 out of 8 games in the regular season. And it only went 3-2. It only got a KO for every time it came. 1 KO every time it came. And I don't think that's exactly how the math worked out, but, you know, that's how the numbers worked out in the end. And then 2 out of 3 times it fainted after, right? So it's not fantastic in that regard. What made it the MVP of this season was Cinderace went 11-0 for me in playoffs. It was consistently my MVP in playoff games that I should have lost, honestly. I should have lost out a couple times, and just Cinderace itself, with the coverage it has, Fire, Bug, Dark, and Sucker Punch, Poison and Gunk Shot and Fighting and Low Kick, as well as strong setup moves in Bulk Up and Substitute and Sword Stance. And then Court Change, just threatening Court Change, stopped so many people from bringing hazards versus me. That last week, if my opponent brought lead Vikavolt, or maybe not lead Vikavolt, but like mid-game Vikavolt, I lost on the spot because all my Pokemon would have gotten hit by webs. So just the ability to scare away every single web user, most of the Toxic Spikes users, a lot of Rocks and Spikes users, was so useful to this entire season, giving your opponent not a reason not to just set Rocks turn 1 with a Sashmon is so handy. And the coverage, I didn't realize just how good Fire, Fighting, Poison, Dark, and Bug is less. It's there, but Bug is not a fantastic coverage. But just those 4 hit so many Pokemon, and all of those moves, 120 base power. Sucker Punch obviously isn't, but the other 3 are so strong that when you throw Stab on them, you're KOing things that are weak to them. You get a Bulk Up and suddenly you're burning through other things too. And that 119 speed tier, I think that's perfect. That is so nice, sitting right above those 115s. And there are a lot of frail 115s, 110s, 105s, 100s. You're outspeeding all of them unless they're scarfed and doing so much consistent damage. Getting burns, you can use Will-O-Wisp, support set, you can go Blaze. Cinderace is a fantastic Pokemon. If you haven't used this Pokemon, do yourself a favor and go use it, because it was absolutely my MVP. Ended up going 14-2 in 8 games. Not quite as good of a KD as Gholdengo, I suppose. Or maybe it was. Maybe my math isn't mathing. But just fantastic Pokemon. Did everything we needed to. Luckily, we landed all the moves we needed to. I didn't run... Okay, I'm going to be honest. I didn't run High Jump Kick a single time this season, I don't think. Maybe I ran it in the beginning because I have really bad memory when it gets to like 3 months ago. But multiple people brought Protect to counter High Jump Kick and make us hurt ourselves. You almost always are just fine running Low Kick. There are very few Pokemon that just eat a Low Kick. And things like Terapagos isn't kind of annoying. There are Pokemon that are not hit by Low Kick by at least 80 base power are so few and far between these days that are fully evolved. So Low Kick went absolutely crazy. Cinderace, just so many KOs. I struggle sometimes with running good offensive Pokemon, and this playoff season was the season of Cinderace. It absolutely carried me, and obviously I would draft it again. It's my favorite Pokemon. I've drafted it. It's not my favorite Pokemon. It's probably one of my favorite Gen 8 Pokemon, top 3 easily. Didn't even pick it as a starter, funnily enough, but it's so good. Like, I can't tell you enough just how many roles this thing combines into one. It's a scary sweeper. It can set up the bulk up set, and semifinals went so hard against my opponent. It's the only reason we were able to win that was because we could get our attack and defense set up. So absolutely adore it. Iron Hands. If you had asked me during semifinals about Iron Hands, I probably would have put it right here below Landorus. After its performance, I'm going to put it above Grumpig. Actually, no, I'm going to put it in Amazing. Where would I put it, though? Probably above Grafaiai, unfortunately. Probably above Moltres. I would say if one spot on this tier list is equal, it's going to be Iron Hands and Gholdengo. These guys are absolutely the same in my mind in terms of utility. My favorite thing about building with Iron Hands is doing the EV spreads. Normally you run 252 in special defense. You don't need to run that much in attack. You shouldn't run much in health, honestly. It's the return on investment is so bad where its base health stat is so high. Put it somewhere else. Put it in defense, put it in SPDF, put it in attack, and only some attack really. And then put some into speed. We had some aggressive speed creeps this season that I think really paid off. But if you've watched the finals game, you'll know that the biggest reason that I adore Iron Hands is we ran Quick Claw as opposed to an actually useful item that's consistent. And because of Quick Claw, we outsped Pheasantipity on the one turn that Quick Claw mattered, and we were able to KO it. And pretty much that nail in the coffin. Like, there was nothing my opponent could do to everything I had left in the back because it was a clean 6-0. So that one turn really sealed the deal. And the funny thing was, if Quick Claw had activated on a different turn, it actually would have hurt us. Against Brute Bonnet, if we went first with that Drain Punch, then we wouldn't have got our health back from the close combat. We would have drain punched again. But I assume we KO before it gets the minus defense from close combat. But if we don't and it outspeeds us the next turn, we would be on like 20%. We wouldn't have done any of the work. We would have never KO'd Colossal with it. So just that fact alone, it went so hard. It's such a good specially defensive, or not specially defensive, but such a good sponge. There are not that many Pokemon in the game that can 2-hit KO Iron Hands if you invest in it correctly, and that's so funny to me. I did try to make a meme set work once with the Iron Defense Body Press with the Spadef boost from Booster Energy by running like Min Attack and like almost Min Defense, but we still had Iron Defense. I don't know about that one. That one was a bad idea. It was a good idea into my opponent's initial team, but against Dondozo and Whimsicott, we're just never going to really break that. Other than that, though, Iron Hands is absolutely fantastic. The Volts, being able to Volt Switch, I almost think is a waste half the time because it's so strong. Why do you want to use a really weak Volt Switch? But then, you know, Momentum is very useful to have. Assault Vest is this thing's bread and butter. You slap on an Assault Vest, put 252 in special defense, and yeah, you're never dying to a special hit. You're laughing at attacks that should do way more damage. And it's no wonder that this guy was like #1 in usage in VGC for a while. I only just realized that this tier list, Cinderace's head has been cut off the whole time. So we're going to fix it at the very end, which is funny. But yeah, Iron Hands, great Gloomon. And I think it fits on a ton of teams, honestly. I think it's so good. Electric Fighting, I don't think we had any of that before this generation, right? And then we got both Hands and Palmot, and obviously Hands is the big standout because it's just an amazing Hariyama with so many benefits. So yeah, that's my tier list of the NBBL Season 3. I really enjoyed this season. I had a lot of fun, so many good opponents, so many good battles. Nova did a great job leading it. Nova does do streams of the battles that are always really entertaining. He does a good job analyzing them. So I don't know if I've linked him at all other than the battle we had together, but if you haven't, check out Nova's channel. Like, he does a great job running the league, and he is in a lot of leagues, and he does well. He plays in a lot of leagues. And if you're a fan of Crocalor or Galarian Slowking, definitely watch him because you'll get more than your fill of those two Pokemon because I know he really enjoys them. Other than that, yeah, leave a comment, let me know your thoughts on these Pokemon. If you thought I did a horrible job with Ogerpon and I should try it again or something like that. Love to hear your feedback. Love to hear your thoughts on these Pokemon. And yeah, we'll see you in the next league. I guess I'll make another one of these at the end of UNPL Spring Fling, maybe, if we get far enough. We'll see. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next time.